Madam President.
The senator from Massachusetts.
Madam President, is the Senate in a quorum call?
We are not.
Beautiful. Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I have 14 requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and the minority leaders.
Duly noted.
Madam President, over the past several weeks, I've heard my colleagues on both sides of the aisle voice concerns about an issue I've been raising for years: protecting children and teens from online dangers. Recently, much of that conversation has focused on the social media app TikTok. I want to be clear. TikTok poses serious and specific privacy problems. We're talking about a company that could expose Americans' users, including young users, personal and sensitive information to the Chinese government. The intelligence community has raised grave concerns that Beijing could potentially influence millions of American TikTok users with the platform's algorithms, spread malware to our smartphones, force the company to amass troves of data on users, and then demand that information be handed over to the Chinese Communist Party. In other words, TikTok could collect your personal data without your consent and then target you with information that the Chinese government wants you to see, or potentially even worse, monitor where you go and what you do. We already know that TikTok is currently on privacy probation with the Federal Trade Commission consent decree. They had to pay a $5 million fine for violating the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. That's my law. We should listen to those warnings, and we should do our job to legislate and regulate in response to these warnings. I'm pleased to hear so much concern for the experiences of our young people online. This is the kind of formidable bipartisan movement to rein in the overreach of big tech that we have needed in this chamber 3 months ago, when lobbyists flooded to the Capitol to kill my children and teens' Online Privacy and Protection Act, Copper 2.0, to raise protections up to age 16 for young people in our country in terms of the protection of their privacy. Here's the reality. Asserting that TikTok stands alone as the one platform that poses a serious surveillance threat to our nation's young people is deliberately missing the big tech forest for the TikTok trees. It is in this dark, dank forest where even more dangers lurk. TikTok needs to be regulated immediately. We can agree on that, but it is absolutely not the only digital danger kids face today. There is no justification for starting and stopping there. Because do you know who else is on privacy probation with the Federal Trade Commission in addition to TikTok? YouTube. Google's video platform also violated my law. The Federal Trade Commission fined it $170 million for invading kids under the age of 12 and their privacy. And that's just a slap on the wrist to Google, $170 million. Oh, and Facebook, too? The Federal Trade Commission fined Facebook $5 billion for violating users' privacy protections. Remember, TikTok was fined $5 million. Facebook has been fined $5 billion for violating privacy in our country. So yes, we do have to address the TikTok threat. But what we really need to do is to take on all of big tech with a set of common sense protections to stop the tsunami of privacy invasions kids face today online. America's children and teens are literally dying because of the impacts of social media platforms, and we must save them from drowning. In other words, I agree with my colleagues. Let's make sure kids are protected from Chinese surveillance. But at the end of the day, Our moral obligation is to protect our youngest people from an entire industry that poses a direct and existential threat to their generation's well-being. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention just announced that 1 in 3 high school girls in the United States of America had seriously considered suicide in the last year. 1 in 3 teenage girls seriously considered suicide in the last year. And over half of all teenage girls say that they are, quote, persistently sad or hopeless. Banning TikTok will not solve that problem. At least 1 in 10 girls in the United States attempted suicide in the past year. Can I say that again? 1 in 10 girls in the United States attempted suicide last year. Among LGBTQ youth, the number was 1 in 5 attempted suicide in the past year. Banning TikTok will not solve that problem. 32% of teen girls said that when they felt bad about their bodies, Instagram made them feel even worse. Banning TikTok will not solve that problem. And do you know where that latest statistic comes from? Instagram's parent company, Facebook. Just remember, about 22 million teens log onto Instagram each and every day in America. Our children, our teenagers, they're sick. And big tech is the parasite preying upon them every single day in our country. These aren't Republican children. These aren't Democratic children. These are America's children. And the truth is that a myopic focus on a single app is a major missed opportunity. Why would we act on only one company when we should and can act on all of these companies preying upon the children and teenagers in our country as we debate here on the Senate floor? Taking on TikTok alone will not solve the sinister surveillance that kids and teens face online every single day. Here's an example. Let's say Congress does ban TikTok in the United States. Or perhaps the federal government simply forces the app's Chinese parent company to sell or to divest. Would that stop China from tracking teens online? No, it wouldn't. We would still have no rules and no laws stopping the Chinese government from simply buying sensitive information about young users, which data brokers already traffic during their normal course of business in the United States of America. Because right now, a 14-year-old girl with bulimia or anorexia in our country has 0 privacy rights online. Are we going to do something about that? Do we want to let that young girl continue to be made vulnerable by unscrupulous American or Chinese companies? If we're going to debate this issue, let's talk about it. Let's get right down to what this whole thing should be about. Big tech should not control the agenda in terms of our protections for young teenage girls or boys in our nation. So she cannot tell that 14-year-old girl, Instagram or Snapchat or YouTube, you may not collect, share, or sell my personal information. And by the way, her parents can't tell those companies either. Banning TikTok will not change that. Banning TikTok does not stop the Chinese government or its partners from simply buying the data we're afraid the company will hand over willingly. Is this threat somehow lessened if it's a transaction or opposed to a part of a takeover? Of course not. Here's the truth. Right now, an entire generation is growing up with some of the most powerful companies in history, tracking, targeting, and traumatizing them every single day in our country. Big tech is knowingly and willfully fueling a youth mental health crisis in our nation. You don't have to take my word for it. Listen to the President of the United States. Listen to the Surgeon General of the United States. Listen to the Academy of Pediatrics in our country. Experts all over our nation are drawing a straight line from big tech's business model to the devastating impacts on young Americans' well-being. You know what will help solve this problem? Data privacy protections for children and teenagers in our country. If we want to really deal with a threat to our nation, when 1 in 3 teenage girls considered suicide last year, that's a threat to our nation. When 1 in 10 teenage girls actually attempted suicide last year, that's a danger to our nation. And a lot of it is as a result of social media. Let's get down to this issue. Let's debate TikTok, but let's debate all of it in terms of threats to our country. Because the data these tech companies collect about young users is the raw material, the inputs for powerful artificial intelligence systems. These algorithms take information about kids and teens, and they use it to push toxic content to those young people that they know will grab their attention and keep them scrolling on the app so they can sell more ads and make more money. And banning TikTok will not solve that problem. And on the topic of algorithms, if we're worried about the Chinese government using TikTok's algorithm to influence our elections and our democracy, we should also be worrying about how China uses Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and YouTube as well to undermine our democracy. Let's get at this. If we're going to debate all this, let's put it out here finally. Let's just get big tech out of this debate and have 100 senators talk about the real threats to teenagers, to our democracy. Let's have that debate. We already saw Russia manipulate Facebook in 2016. If we want to protect democracy, let's do it for every single social media platform in our country. And young people are particularly vulnerable to big tech's algorithmic practices. That's why, for more than a decade, I've been introducing legislation that would solve that problem. My update to the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act for kids under 12 and their parents online would give them a Bill of Rights for kids 16 and under in our nation. And the parents could just tell those companies, stop tracking my child. Stop tracking my 14-year-old girl. Stop tracking my 15-year-old girl. If she goes online because she has bulimia or anorexia to get more information, you can't sell that information now to companies that are going to target that girl with more products or information when the parents are only talking to the family's physician. Let's give those families some rights. Let's stand up for those families against these tech companies who are monetizing the mental health of the children in our country. To stop those companies from putting profits over people, over teenagers. We came very close to passing key provisions from that legislation at the end of last year. My bill almost made it. Unfortunately, industry, lobbyists, they stood in our way. They made it impossible for it to pass because it destroys their business model of preying upon, making money off of young people in our nation. But we just can't be deterred. We have to be more determined than ever to get this done on behalf of the parents, the pediatricians, and young people who are demanding action. I know we can do it. And there are leaders in the House and the Senate, in both parties, who want to get this done. So yes, we must be clear-eyed about threats of Chinese surveillance. Yes, we must be clear-eyed about TikTok's national security risks. And yes, we must be clear-eyed about the unique threats to young people in our country who are on that app. But I would urge my colleagues, lift your gaze. Take off your blinders. Be honest about what legislative proposals to ban TikTok can and cannot accomplish on behalf of our youngest and most vulnerable in our country. Our obligation in this moment is to end the sinister surveillance across all of the big tech behemoths that are fueling a youth mental health crisis in this country. TikTok poses a serious and unique problem, but we know the problem is much bigger and much more pernicious than just one single app, as bad as it is. We have a responsibility to take action, and I call on my colleagues to join in a bipartisan fashion. As we debate TikTok, let's debate all of it. Let's pass the bill that protects the imminent threat to the mental health of the children and teenagers in our country every single day. We want to talk about TikTok and its longer-term threats. Let's talk about the threat right now. Let's talk about how young people are being harmed. Let's pass that legislation at the same time. That's going to be my goal as this debate unfolds. It's to have votes on the floor of the Senate on the protection of the children and teenagers in our country from Chinese and American companies who are exploiting them every single day. I close with that number that I started with. 1 in 3 teenage girls in the United States contemplated suicide last year. 1 in 10 teenage girls attempted suicide last year. We all know the role social media is playing in this. This is our moment to take on this entire industry globally to make sure that we protect the most precious resource we have to protect the future of our country, and that is young people. They may be only 20% of our population, but they're 100% of our future, and right now they're being exploited by a single industry. Let's take on that industry. Madam President, I yield back.
President?
Senator from